and welcome. Raise your new game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how are you doing this week? How are things feeling? I hope all is well. I really like the weather cooling off a bit. Upper 60s, lower 70s, 50s first thing in the morning. That's a pretty good range for me. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Really good temps for pickleball. Very nice. I don't love the shorter days. Mentioned that before. Still a bit disoriented by it, right? It seems much later than it is. Anyway, that's the same every year, which is sort of funny to think about. It's literally the same every year, and yet I still struggle to adapt and adjust to it every year. Anyway, I hope things are good with you. Plenty to talk about this week, as always. Some thoughts on parenting a college student, the pager attack in Lebanon, my first election volunteer shift, finding meaning and purpose in our lives, the importance of relationships, our challenge of the week, several TV show updates and reports, and amazing bass work in Earth, Wind, and Fire. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what things gave me a lift this week, and what things are pulling me down? The one up that comes to mind is our conversations with our son now that he's back at college. He's really good about staying connected with us. He'll call pretty regularly, text, happy to share what's going on, send pictures of things he's working on, ask for feedback on a paper, things like that. And we, of course, regularly check in with him, too. It's not only coming from his direction. But it's just really lovely in many ways. It's great to hear how he's doing. Great to see the person he's becoming. So much more mature and insightful than I was at that age. The best lift in it for me is just being thankful to have such a great relationship. I'm genuinely grateful for that. I love that he wants to check with us, that he feels connected and comfortable and comforted by it. That was not the case for me at that age. It's not the case with some of our friends' kids. It would be so easy for it not to be the way it is. And that just gives me so much satisfaction and happiness. You can imagine, right? You're happy for the specifics of the call, but there's a second, deeper level of happiness that the call happened in the first place. Anyway, pretty great. Honestly, could not be better. Feeling very fortunate about all of that, and it gives me a lift. For my downs, not a lot to mention. The one thing, I guess, is that the scale has not been my friend lately. I've been tracking my weight, as you know, and basically following the Noom program for several months now in a maintenance mode, not losing weight, just trying to stay at the same level. And that's been going great. 6 weeks or so ago, I had a stretch where I stopped tracking, got into a bit of a dessert habit again for a couple weeks. Not super bad, but slipping a little. All of a sudden, my weight spiked up like almost 10 pounds from where it had been. And you might say, well, that's what happens when you eat desserts. But it shouldn't be that bad. 10 pounds, even 7 or 8 pounds, is a lot of actual weight to put on. Given that a pound is 3,500 calories, you'd have to eat an extra 1,000 calories a day, which is quite a bit of food, for almost a month to put on 10 pounds. I did nowhere near that, so the spike just didn't make sense. Now, it's not uncommon for your weight to jump 2 or 3 pounds in either direction and not mean anything, so I figured part of it was that. But still, even 5 actual pounds of weight gain doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, I am starting to feel a bit heavier, so it seems real, but I can't really explain it. So I kicked back into Noom loss mode early this week. It's coming down a little, but not as fast as expected. And I guess the point is, I just don't understand this latest spike, and the thought of the battle to get things back down again is sort of a weight on me. No pun intended. Not a huge thing, but a bit of a down. Overall, still pretty great. All right, that's ups and downs. Next up, top stories. This week feels sort of strange, actually. There's not one big thing on my mind news-wise. Nothing stands out about Trump or Kamala or the race. Feels pretty steady. Basically just classic campaign grind mode now, doing the work. Polls are still tight, but the trend is also still good. Not much to report there. One story that did get my attention was the crazy exploding pager attack in Lebanon. Maybe you heard about that. First, of course, you have to acknowledge the reality of that for the people on the ground, the horror of it at a personal level. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, that was a pretty ingenious operation. First, from the Israeli side, given that Hezbollah is your sworn enemy, committed to your destruction, firing rockets into your country pretty much daily, thousands of people evacuated for nearly a year now, backed by Iran, all of that. So you learn that their top leadership tells their people to stop using cell phones because they can be tracked. So they order 3,000 pagers so they can communicate that way. Somehow Israel learns about that, intercepts those pagers, inserts explosives or something into them, alters the software. This is coming from early reporting. When the pagers arrive, they get handed out, and Israel now has a bomb, basically, in the pocket of every senior member of Hezbollah. Insane. Apparently, they set it up so that the pager would beep in a way that the person had to pull it out and look at it. They had to push a button to stop the beep. Pushing the button triggered the explosion. 3,000 individuals all around the country hit all at once. You just have so many questions, right? How did they pull that off? How did they get to the pagers? I read a later story. It's possible they had set up shell companies years before that owned the pager company, so they were actually the manufacturer. And we'll probably never know the actual story. But you just have to be impressed with that. You can't imagine a more precise targeting of your enemy than that. Reports are that there were still some civilian casualties, one young girl I've heard of. Still terrible to think about that at that level. But again, I was just really struck by the sophistication and precision of that operation. Another story that's just breaking as I write this is the indictment of Eric Adams, the mayor of New York. On the one hand, I don't really care. I love New York, but it's clearly a local issue. Interesting to see him take basically the Trump line of defense. I'm working for you, so the feds are coming after me. I don't know how credible that is. It sounds like a pretty serious indictment. But of course, that didn't stop Trump from playing that card over and over again. Adams is also a Democrat, but I guess blaming the Justice Department is the new normal for everyone. This is just what we do now when we get charged with something. Also, it does seem to undercut Trump's argument that the Justice Department is going after Republicans, though nothing proves that better than the Hunter Biden prosecution. Anyway, sort of a slow news week, surprisingly. Kind of nice, lower levels of fear and outrage. Maybe that's just in comparison to all the insane news weeks we've had lately. On the election watch, going very small this week, but I put in my first shift volunteering at our local Democratic Party office this week. I've been looking for ways to help, as I mentioned. Not going to go knocking on doors. Heard they were looking for office volunteers. Thought I could do that, so I signed up for 2 shifts a week through the election. Had my first one yesterday. Really didn't know what to expect. Turns out it was a slower day than normal. Mostly people stopping in looking for yard signs, wanted to talk about how things are going. The main bummer was that we still don't have any Harris Walls yard signs. Apparently there's still a big shortage everywhere, but people were understanding about that. I was there for 4 hours, which was sort of a lot, honestly. Lots of time sitting looking at my phone, but it was interesting too. I had a nice conversation with the woman who was in charge for the day. She was very nice. Met a bunch of people who came in for signs. It was interesting. We're in a small town in southwestern Wisconsin. Had I not known these folks were coming into the Democratic office, I would not have expected them to be Democrats, just based on how they looked. White, older, a lot of them were sort of cranky looking, all stereotypes, of course, and all obviously completely wrong on my part. Not happy to notice that bias in myself, but very happy to realize the Democrats look like that too. So that was interesting. I also helped the group build their website 4 years ago, and there's updating work to be done there, so I'll be helping with that too. So on the one hand, this all feels pretty small, sitting in the office, handing out signs, making some tweaks to the website, not doing that much. On the other hand, it's a lot more than nothing, and this is what elections are ultimately about, right? It's people on the ground in their communities talking to each other and getting out the vote. So I'm glad to be doing it, not expecting to love every minute of it, but that's fine, right? That's not the point. The point is to do something, to trust that it makes a difference, and to know that I stood up and did my little part when it felt so important. All right, that's Top Stories. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Last time, we talked about the great Zen saying, be master of mind rather than mastered by mind. I hope you had a chance to think about the questions for that one, because you really can get to most everything you need to know to understand and master your inner game by digging into that powerful statement. This week, I want to talk about another quote from the book. This is the one from Leo Tolstoy. The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity. The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity. This can sound like a grand call to action, but I actually think that's the wrong way to read it. And it's actually a bad idea to read it that way. What I really like in the quote is the perspective it gives us on finding meaning and purpose in our lives. That is typically the deepest concern people have with their lives, is feeling like it doesn't have meaning and they have no purpose. If you read Tolstoy's statement as a grand call to action, like you'll only find your purpose when you're doing something that serves all of humanity, you're setting yourself up for failure and disappointment, because no one can do that, right? Maybe literally a handful of people throughout all of history. Could you even make a case they were serving all of humanity? That's not a realistic measure for the rest of us. The way I read the quote is that our ultimate purpose in life is to serve the humanity in our lives, the people closest to us, our family, our friends, our co-workers. That is where we can really find our purpose. And here's how I measure that. We are serving people when their lives are better off because we're in it, and better off in the ways that are most important to them. They feel happier, more connected, more positive. They feel better about themselves, about their lives. Another way to think of this is, if we were gone, they would genuinely miss us. They would feel the loss of us in their lives. Now, it doesn't have to be a devastating loss, just a noticeable difference, okay? We should be a net positive in the lives of those closest to us. That's our purpose in life. That's how I read Tolstoy's quote. And there are two practical benefits to thinking this way. The first is that it helps us have the right perspective and priority for what we should be working on in our lives. We don't need to find a grand purpose, a mission, a great project of some kind to dedicate ourselves to. I mean, it's fine if we do. It can feel great to be involved in something like that, but it's not at all necessary. Also, if we're being honest, we can get so involved in a grand mission that we neglect the people around us. You certainly hear that story all the time. And that's a real mistake, in my opinion. The better approach is to work from the inside out. Serve those closest to us first. If that's all the farther we get, we've done our job. And by the way, that's also the hardest work, right? Genuinely connecting with and supporting people in personal relationships over long periods of time, that's real work. So it's something to commit to and be proud of. If you can do that and also help people outside of that circle, great, but that's a bonus. The other practical benefit of this perspective is to help us feel better about our lives now. I imagine most people are actually a net positive to the people in their lives already. We support each other, we care about each other, we help each other out, we try to be our best with each other. They would miss us if we were gone. There is a lot to be proud of there already. Could we do better? Of course, always. That's true for everyone. But we're already doing the work, and it's the most important work. So when you can really internalize this idea, it's much harder to feel like your life is lacking meaning and purpose, because it's not. You're doing the work that most needs to be done. I really believe that. So anyway, that's why I love this quote, why it's in the book, and why I like to come back to it now and then, because I think it's profoundly helpful perspective to keep in mind. All right, it's Inner Game Gold for this week. The ultimate purpose in life is to serve humanity. Next up, raise your outer game. Last week, we talked about memory and how you might hold a situation where you have a different memory of an event that someone else does. That was an interesting little item. This week, I want to talk about relationships and expand on what we just said about meaning and purpose. Humans are social creatures by design. We literally need to be connected to others to survive emotionally, mentally, even physically. So when I say serving the people in our lives is our ultimate purpose, it's also coming from this deeper evolutionary perspective. For parents, again, evolutionarily, it's literally our purpose, right? This is what our genes have evolved to do. We are built to have children and help them survive until they can have children of their own, right? That's literally the whole story. And if you're a parent, you feel that. It changes you. It naturally becomes the whole job, right? But even if you're not a parent, you can still feel it. When you help someone, it feels great. When you think about a relationship and realize they would miss you if you were gone, it feels great. If you take a good look at your experience with others, it's pretty clear that we can find a deep sense of satisfaction and meaning and purpose in simply helping and serving others. So that's Raise Your Outer Game this week. Think about your relationships and how you might bring a little extra light into them. Next up, our challenge of the week. Okay, for our challenge this week, we'll continue with this theme. The challenge is to take a fresh look at your relationships. Again, family, friends, co-workers, etc. And just ask yourself if there's something you could comfortably do to serve them in some way this week. A call, email, a text, just to check in. Maybe invite them to your pickle game, go for a walk. Maybe take a moment to say hi at work, ask them how they're doing. It doesn't take much to lighten up someone's day in a way that they will feel. It really doesn't. It's easy to do. It feels great for you also. It's a wonderful gift, and it helps you connect with the feeling of having meaning and purpose in your life. It's a pretty good deal all around. So think about that. What could you do this week? Next up, highly recommended. This week, still reading the Munich book I mentioned, enjoying that. Probably will finish this week. Slow Horses, Apple TV, it's just killer. It's so consistently good. Loving that. Bad Monkey, also Apple TV. Getting to the end of that one, still enjoying that a lot. Margaret and I are watching that. Started Kaos on Netflix with Jeff Goldblum as the god Zeus. This is a good show so far. I mean, it's fresh, weird, fun, sort of sci-fi. It does have a bit of a disturbing edge at times. Fair warning about that. But we are enjoying that one. Started Shogun on Hulu, I believe that is. That was the biggest winner at the Emmys last week, so we decided to check that out. I can see why it's so popular. I am 3 or 4 episodes into Better Call Saul now. Still loving that. Hope it doesn't get too dark. That's a lot of TV. Sounds like we must watch all the time. Feels like that sometime, but we don't. But anyway, it's a lot to keep track of. The biggest fun thing for me this week I wanted to talk about was I sat down one night and listened to some Earth, Wind, and Fire in my good headphones. And I never noticed this before, but the bass player in that band is just insanely great. His name is Verdin White. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, Verdin. He's actually the co-founder of Earth, Wind, and Fire with his brother Maurice White. He's also on the Rolling Stone list of the 50 greatest bass players of all time. And of course, I loved Earth, Wind, and Fire back in the day, but I'd never really listened to the bass on those records, but it is just genius. I have a special love for the bass. I played a lot of keyboard bass during my band years, Beatles, Led Zeppelin, a lot of stuff. So I came to really appreciate how different the bass is in a band versus keyboards, which is what I played most of the time. The bass, along with the drums, are the foundation, right? They're the groove, which is really everything in rock and pop. Keyboards tend to be the icing around the edges. So I really do love the bass. I actually played the bass on most of my records, but that was not always the best idea. I had a real, genuinely great bass player on my first record, a friend of mine named Paul Peterson, goes by St. Paul from back in the Prince days. He was a protege of Prince. He played amazing stand-up bass on my first record. A lot of good work all across that record. Great favor to me. I'll link to one of those songs in the notes. And there's actually, what I don't mind saying, is a pretty great bass line I played on one of my later songs. Bit of a Sting homage, but I'll link to that too, just for fun. But anyway, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I was listening to some of their hits, and time after time, I'm listening to the bass. I don't know why, but I just kind of put my attention on it. And it's just the most original and funky and solid and tight bass part. In a lot of cases, I couldn't even quite figure out what he was doing. It wasn't what you'd normally expect. It wasn't landing on the beat or even the measure that I would normally think to do. I was just sort of mesmerized to discover what seemed like hidden gems in these tracks I'd heard and loved so many times. That's part of the benefit of getting better headphones, by the way. You really can hear things more clearly. It even strikes me that you can't really know the full picture of what an artist had in mind until you listen on good headphones, because you're just not hearing everything. You're not hearing what they put in there. Anyway, that's a little in the musical weeds, but I really loved that experience. Just so much fun. So if that would possibly mean anything to you, listening to the bass parts in Earth, Wind & Fire songs, I highly recommend checking it out, along, of course, with just revisiting all the great songs from Earth, Wind & Fire. And that is highly recommended for this week. Reminder, for more helpful ideas on how to raise your inner game and bring more meaning and purpose into your life, check out the Raise Your Inner Game book or the Sports Academy training if you're an athlete. RaiseYourInnerGame.com for that. Otherwise, that's it for this week. Hope you have a great week to come. Keep up the good work. I will talk to you next time.